Hello. Hi, everyone. I hope we're
Hello.
doing well. Welcome to today's masterclass, which is as part of the Game Dev Champions. I hope we're
Hello.
doing well. Welcome to today's masterclass. God, sorry, my brain just went totally blank. Welcome to today's masterclass for the Game Dev Champions event. Today we're going to be looking at how can we design games for younger audiences. We've got an amazing panel of people who are ready to share so much experience. I'm excited to learn. And we will get started very soon. Welcome in. One final thing before we do start. If we could refrain from saying people's names when they ask questions in the chat, it will be recorded. So we just want to encourage as many people to ask questions as possible. But other than that, hi, I hope your day's going well. I'm roasting. I am also really hopeful that no one can hear my fan in the background because it's too warm. I've had to shut the window because people in cars kept going by with like beats and it was a little much. So yeah, fingers crossed it's not unbearable for you. I want to welcome Anna, Dan, and Sid all to the Safe in Our World Twitch channel, but to this masterclass specifically. They are going to be a fountain of knowledge for you to learn from. And we're going to get to know a little bit more about them very soon. But first, I just wanted to ask the three of you to tell me a little bit about Outright Games, who are helping us with today's masterclass.
Yeah, sure. I can introduce Outright Games. So that's where we all work. Outright Games is a leader in family-friendly entertainment. We're a games publisher. We specialize in licensed games for young audiences. The company, they've been around since 2016, but our team specifically, our game design team, we were founded around 2020, 2021. Because Outright Games publish about 10 titles a year on average, we help keep an eye on the game design quality and make sure that they're appropriate for the varying audiences they're designed for, because we cater from everywhere from age 4 preschool up to teens, 12, 13. Yes, Barbie's return to console games. I'm very excited.
You are correct. I am muted. I'm silly. The question I asked was, it's very cool and exciting because Outright are working on a Barbie game. There's always an issue with me doing a stream. Very sorry, everyone. But yeah, I think that's really cool. But before we, I guess, move on to the general topic of today, could you all introduce yourselves and what you do within Outright Games as well, and a little bit more about your background, favorite games, pets, that sort of thing?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So my role at Outright is associate game designer. I've been there for 3 years. Before that, it was like my first full-time job after uni. So I graduated about 2020. I did a games art degree. By the time I finished, I realized I was a bit more interested in helping developers, production skills, that kind of stuff. So I actually spent most of that year doing game jams before getting my job at Outright.
Nice, awesome. Sid, how about you?
Um, yeah. Hey everyone. I'm Sid, and I am a creative assistant at Outright Games. And I started in the industry as an indie dev, designing and developing small projects with my partner while I was working at the university. And at Outright Games, I look at the design. Look after the design of some of our projects that we are working on and making sure that they're approachable and fun. And just wanted to also say my favorite games. I've been playing lots of Baldur's Gate for the fifth time.
Oh my gosh,
It's like my fifth playthrough,
it's so
and
good.
Honestly, there's
I
just so
haven't
many
finished it
playthroughs I've
yet,
done.
so like no spoilers, but I am on Act
No
3.
spoilers.
I had like a really I like went into girl rot mode for like 2 months in October and just sat in front of the TV and played Baldur's Gate nonstop. And then I came back and something changed, and for some reason I was just like, I don't really want to go back to it right now. And then I found my path again this week, and so I'm very excited to get back into it again because I love it so much.
Yeah, it's so much fun. So yeah, I've been playing lots of that, and yeah, I think that's probably one of my favorite games at the moment. So yeah, that's me.
Perfect. Dan, how about you?
Hi, yeah, so I'm Dan. I'm senior game designer at Outright Games. So I've been at Outright now for 2.5 years, roughly. Um, Before that, I think I've been in the games industry now like 20 or so years. It's flown by. I've
Wow,
loved every
yeah.
minute of it. But previous to that, I was a systems designer at a company called Firesprite, and then before that, it was Traveller's Tales and various different design roles on the Lego titles. So yeah, pretty much I just love games. I think like a lot of people in the games industry. I'm currently playing Ballistro, like on Steam. I'm pretty obsessed with it. It's a fun little card game.
No, I've heard a lot
Um,
about it. I've just never tried it myself, but I feel like maybe I should give it a go.
yes, well, set aside a bit of time for it. That's the advice there. But yeah.
Amazing. Perfect. Also, one little thing I wanted to add before we move on is that Outright Games is actually one of our founding partners, I believe, for Safe in Our World, and they're a level up partner. They're wonderful. They have taken part in several bundles with us at this point, and they're an absolute joy to work with. So I'm really happy to be on this panel with all of you and to celebrate Outright Games in the work that you do to support Safe in Our World as well, because it does mean a lot. So thank you. However, let's get started on game design, game development. I guess the first kind of question I wanted to ask was, where do you even start when you want to make a new game? I mean, a lot of people who are going to be in this game jam are probably just in the early processes, but maybe like midway through at this point in creating a game. But there are a few people that I've seen join our Discord that have just begun or just joined and still want to get involved, which is brilliant. But where do you even get started? Like what's the first step in that process?
Yeah, it's like quite daunting, like starting a game. I think I'll start because I get involved quite early on when it's just a discussion. Um, so because we make licensed games, we'll often start with the IP um, that the game will be based on. Um, and IPs and brands, they often come with their own like brand pillars. So they might be dedicated to like friendship or creativity. So it's kind of like a game jam where you're starting with a prompt and being like, okay, what game ideas can I try and generate based on what this brand is? So normally we'll brainstorm like 2 or 3 ideas of like slightly different genres and get feedback from the licensor, like Hasbro or Paramount, on what these ideas are. Um, and then get feedback on it. And then also because we use external studios, we'll collaborate with them as well because ultimately they'll be the people making the game. So we also try to work to their strengths. We have like specific studios that are really good at like vehicle racing stuff, or people who are really good at like open world. So we start with the brand because that's really important to like represent it authentically, and then we sort of build the fun and the game design on top of that.
Amazing. Either of you two got anything to add?
No,
Nope.
I think the early stages, like as Anna said, like are like generally covered, and like we try to make sure that we've got a really good idea of what the game is going to be before we kind of take it to the devs and stuff like that. So I think it's very important that we kind of establish that before we move on to the next stages. So yeah.
Awesome. Exciting. And so we were talking about kind of like looking at IP and idea generation. what would you say, or what would be your advice, I suppose, for people who obviously don't have an IP to start out that, like, and are getting that idea from scratch? Like, do you have any thoughts or advice on how people can get started?
Yeah, I can chip in on that. So I think you can kind of create some fundamental pillars for that your game might be built upon. So just as an example, like for us, we've got a few core pillars that we always have and we always kind of start with. And one of them is setting up a clear core game loop. Um, and that's something that we generally tackle first. And like that can entail like identifying what we want the moment to moment gameplay to feel like, and what the player would be achieving in those moments is something we try to sort out very early on. Um, if we are especially working on a game for a very young audience, we will often find ourselves trying to unlearn some of the common video game tropes as well. So things like health bars, stamina bars, holding a button to charge up a move, things like that, which might be something that a lot of people might be very used to. But kids who are picking up their first game might not know these tropes. So the kind of next thing that we think about is like making sure that the onboarding and tutorials are done correctly, and making sure that we're not just relying on text but also using things like images in the tutorials. Maybe video explanations or like voiceover is something that we also use. So yeah, we put a lot of kind of love and care into these kind of initial elements.
Yeah, amazing. No, that's really helpful. I've seen something in the chat as well that says I've never had a problem with game ideas, but I've always had a problem with ideas small enough for a solo developer because almost all my ideas would take too long to make on my own, which I'm sure quite a few people have also experiencing. I know there's a few people who are saying, "Oh gosh, my game idea is far too ambitious for this project," which is good in a way, I suppose, but also quite daunting if you want to finish it within the, you know.
Yeah, I think a phrase I like for, I guess in general, but also this applies to game jams, is like, what's your minimum viable product, right? What does the game have to be that you can achieve in the time frame? Like, you want to make sure you can get to a location and like find the hidden stone in your product. Like, you might have to make the level really short to achieve that, but at least you've achieved that like game loop of getting somewhere and like getting the reward. Um, that's something we have to do in our games as well, like making sure that kids are feeling satisfied with what they're playing. Do you have anything to add, Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think knowing that something is too big as an idea is half the battle sometimes. So I guess a bit of advice would be try and kind of, and it's difficult, but plan out a bit of buffer. So obviously a bit of contingency if maybe an idea doesn't work. So have a bit of time set aside for kind of iteration and prototyping. And then at the end, obviously, maybe a bit of time if, you know, things don't quite work out, and time to kind of put things together. But yeah, I think it's always a tricky one, really. I think as designers, we always want to put in more and more. But I think, sometimes less can be more, certainly in terms of the games jam.
Yeah, exactly. It would be cool to have like a nice to have list, and as you can do as many as you can. You can have the core things you need to get done to make it, work as a game. But you can always there can always be an act two, right? You can always do more after the.
Definitely.
That's something I'm actually
Yeah.
trying to promote to people who are taking part in this game jam, is that whilst it needs to be a completed and it must feel finished, it doesn't mean that you can't expand on it after the jam is finished, and continue working on it to make it even more polished. So yeah.
And I think, so
Oh
I
no,
was
no,
just going
you
to add
go.
as well, I think sometimes, we're all guilty of it. We could be our harshest critics.
Yes.
So I think, just get it out there, just see what other people think as well, for feedback. I think, be it you don't want to release it until it's quite right, and I think once it is out there, you can get so much back just by having that feedback. And obviously, I think the achievements of releasing something as well, it's a great experience. It's all invaluable, really.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many people taking part in this jam for the first time, and they're just having a crack and seeing what happens. And that's all we could ask for. Like it's meant to be such a learning process as well, which is why we're hosting these masterclasses, especially for folks who are getting involved in maybe a section of game development they're not very confident in or not very well versed in, and that's what it's all about. Someone else in the chat has just said that they really like the length of this game jam because it gives them enough buffer time to really dive into the ideas like Dan was talking about, which is exactly what we wanted. So that's great. So kind of moving back into your experiences in making games designed for children. We were talking before about the Barbie game, but then also you've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles coming up too. Do you consult children in the process of game development? How does that work in terms of the development process in getting kids involved to get real feedback from the people who will be playing your games?
Yeah, I mean, we have to do it because even though we're experienced designers, we're also adults, and we can we need to get children playing the games to learn more. I mean, Dan gets quite involved in our playtests, don't you?
Yeah, so obviously, kind of when I was starting out as a designer, I think a lot of the time you kind of have to kind of consider the player. It's something that you always have to do. You champion their voice. You think about the goals of the game, essentially, the sort of things that that you want them to experience, and obviously one of them is fun. And I think obviously as I've kind of gone throughout my career, I've seen more and more how invaluable it is to get that experience firsthand, to get someone playing it. And obviously it's a balancing act sometimes, because if something isn't necessarily completely finished, kids will just they'll go off, they'll want to make their own fun and experience. So there's a lot to unpack, really. There's a lot to consider when it comes to user testing, but outright we're so privileged because we have like partners that we work with, Becky and Olivia Playtest Games, who actually play with children in a house setting, which is I guess a very scientific method. It's almost kind of like on the ground testing, so you get the honest reactions of obviously the children as a playing, but also the family reaction as well. Um, and I'll say as well, I'm quite lucky. I've got a bit of a family of testers as well, who are fans of obviously games like Bluey, for example, where I think sometimes again you do get answers for questions, but I think a lot of the time you need to kind of just observe what people are finding as well as asking questions, because you don't want to kind of lead answers, or say what this is how you do it, you're stuck on this, you should be playing it like this. It's just letting children find the fun themselves.
I imagine it must be quite difficult if you're, such so proud of your work and showing it to a child, and there being the potential for them to be like, I don't get it, or I don't know what to do. I'm not enjoying it.
Yeah.
It's not fun. How does that impact your development? Like, have you ever had to completely change track on something because of feedback from players?
I think, well, from my experience, again, when I speak about buffer, it should always be something that if you won't ask the question, you have to expect kind of all possibilities. I think a lot of the time, I think again, if we're testing specific things, we maybe have an assumption about how things will go, but quite often, children will surprise you with what they find fun, or maybe things that you felt would be particularly easy. Children don't quite understand and grasp. Um, but yeah, I think it- taking taking kind of like the perfectionist view that maybe designers have, and something I used to have, where it must be a certain way. People, I've spent weeks designing this, I've tested it, it's going to be great. Um, but I think sometimes it's maybe barriers of entry. So I see accessibility as it's not necessarily taking it away all the challenge from an element of a game. It's looking at if potential kind of pressure points that children would be stuck on, or things that maybe an adult would find obvious that the children wouldn't. And I think it's important to kind of always consider, um, no assumptions really. You know, you could have a child that's picking up a game for the first time, can't read, you know, has never held a controller. So there's a lot of considerations really. But I think ultimately, as a group, you know, we have to kind of reflect what the data says, and the data being what children are kind of saying as they're playing, because it's going to make the game better. And it's similar with game jams. I think having that feedback, be it kind of negative or positive, it's reflecting upon that. And yeah, it is hard, but that's how I see it. I think it's almost kind of a duty to the player and fans that we must kind of you know, have that honesty really, and be willing to kind of reflect on that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a lot of what you're saying also links back with the accessibility masterclass we did a few weeks back, in that it's like you were saying about difficulty, for example, or even just like simple toggles to allow to have like symbolic representations of what you're supposed to do rather than words, for example. Like there's so many different things that you can involve more and more players in, and ultimately expand your own player base for the game, which is a good thing. So I love that these ideas aren't necessarily specifically just for children, like they can be for a lot of different audiences as well, which I think is really good. We do have a question in the chat that's asking, at what stage do you start to do this? Because I imagine with a 5-month jam, for example, as we grow close to the October deadline, people might be like, well, when do I do it? When's too late? Is this too early? Am I going to give people enough time to feedback properly? Do you have any advice on the time scale for people for a jam at this length?
I think a common mistake with game jams, this is more common when it's like a weekend or a week long jam, is you might not build the game until the last day, the last hour, and you won't have any time to check for any bugs or check if it runs correctly, right? So I would recommend in general, build the game as soon as you can and like actually try and play it. Um, for our projects, as soon as we have like a first playable build or um, something with the game loop functioning, we'll try and test. If we don't, and then let production run its course, and then we'll sort of test quite close to content complete, where most of the final artwork's in, most of the final gameplay is in, so you can kind of test what that sort of final experience will be. But again, even though it's content complete, there's still months of polish time. So, how long is this jam? Remind me.
So it started at the start of June and it will end at the end of October.
Cool. So we're in July now. If you have something, you should build it and test it. Maybe give yourself August to like work hard, and then back at the beginning of September try and build and test again. I think you've got a lot of opportunity to like get feedback and iterate.
Absolutely. Sid, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think something that I used to do when I was in university and we were kind of building our projects, I think our timeline was around 4 months as well, like similar-ish as well. So I think we were encouraged to kind of test almost when you have kind of wrapped up a feature. It doesn't have to be like polished artistically as soon as like a feature gets uh, kind of implemented and it's functioning. You could start like giving it to someone and be like, hey, could you just play and test that? And I think that sort of also worked for like our project. So like as Anna said, like do it as much as you can when you've got the build ready with like all of the features that you do want to test. Because I think uh, the feedback that you get from these tests, you'll need some time to make changes if you need to as well. So you need to leave some space for iterations and tweaks as well. So keeping that in mind, give yourself like lots of time to kind of adapt to the feedback as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. Thank you for that. I'm going to loop back around to what you were saying, Dan, about having a community of testers that do home testing within the family, and kind of discuss that in itself as a factor in creating games. Like, what role do you want your game as a game for younger people to have within the family dynamic, for example?
I mean, obviously, first and foremost, I think that it being a fun experience, and I think another consideration certainly for licensed games is obviously portraying these amazing worlds and characters in a positive light. I think certainly one of the things that is tested, and certainly for younger audiences, is just that authenticity, because children are kind of if they have a kind of favorite character, beloved character, they will know straight away if it's not authentically represented, and that's something. Um, Again, having a young daughter, she's obsessed with Bluey. When she first saw the build, it was like, oh, okay, is this gonna pass the scrutiny? And thankfully it did. But yeah, I think it's very kind of fascinating, the kind of obviously the stories that the players have, and I think in the past, certainly when I was kind of on a development studio, certainly with game jams as well, you can be in a bit of a bubble, a bit of a tunnel really, if you're just kind of focused on kind of features, mechanics, um, getting the game together. And then I think sometimes there's a joy that you can get when you see something that you've kind of worked on, experienced, and obviously with that comes the potential for someone stuck with something. Um, but yeah, I think it's trying to kind of obviously appeal to as many people as possible, but also kind of being mindful of the different kind of play styles, abilities, and kind of what the player wants out of a game as well. And having that play testing is just yeah, it's absolutely invaluable. I think for me, maybe not having it in the past, or maybe having it once the game's released, having that, I guess, opportunity to kind of address things as well, but also knowing what to address, I think is key.
And so when it comes to like co-op modes and things like that, like when I think of family games, I usually think of like, the classic Wii games, Mario Kart, all the rivalry, but like friendly rivalry. But also like as when I was a child, I most of my gaming experience was watching my brother play games where I sit and not do anything and not disrupt, but I was enjoying it because I loved it for some reason. Like that was the experience for me. And so I just wondered if you had suggestions, I suppose, on whether how people figure out whether or not they should aim for a more co-op focused game, whether they should focus on a single player game, from your experiences.
Um, I think for us, because we focus on kids specifically, like these days, a lot of kids' games are on like mobile and tablets. It's quite solo. They might not have the same experience we had where you're like all using a console or like watching your siblings. So we really want to do that. That's why, you know, we create console games primarily, and you can give kids that sort of big screen experience. Like it doesn't always have to be like trapped in a tiny device. Um, Being on console gives us the opportunity to do co-op play and like get all the family and friends involved. Um, I think for your individual game jams, it's really up to you whether you want to support that. Like try to, we love including co-op, but making sure that the single player experience is like really solid and fun is important to us too. So I think if you can make it fun for one person, maybe you could try and push yourself and see if you can make it fun for two, three, four people as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because even with like some of the I'm thinking specifically just about recent games I've played that incorporate multiplayer in a way that's quite subtle. So like Mario Wonder, for example, you don't really do an awful lot of interacting at all with each other if you're on multiplayer. But you still feel connected and you're doing it together and like race against each other, things like that. And I love that about it because you're not technically interacting in the same way that you would do in a traditional online co-op game, for example. So I think there's lots of different ways you could look at doing co-op specifically. So that's something to consider as well. Someone has said in the chat that the problem with co-op multiplayer is that they're much harder to make. Yeah.
I think going back to what you said, I think was a really interesting point about, it doesn't necessarily have to be an interactive one. Just having it on the screen, if you're kind of observing someone else play, and I'm going back maybe a few years, obviously on Mario 3 on the NES. Like I remember kind of I used to take turns with my mum at the time, and she wasn't necessarily a massive gamer, but it's something I remember because it wasn't necessarily you could play in co-op, although there was a versus mode. But again, it's just taking turn. Maybe that's something to kind of consider. And I'm going to plug like an outright game now. A Gigantosaurus Dino Sports. It's kind of like a party game. And one of the kind of features that I was really proud of on that was there's two difficulty modes. So it's kind of like an adult mode and a kid mode essentially. So it kind of leveled the playing field in terms of some of the games, because you know what it's like. Say if it's a Mario Kart, I'll be playing against someone and probably getting beaten. But having that kind of modifier there to kind of have cross generational play is something that you can only really get in co-op, certainly couch co-op. But again, I think in the context of the game jam, it's thinking about the features creep. It's thinking about what the game is, and I think co-op it is a hard thing to do, but when it's done really well, it is it's fantastic.
100%. There was a really interesting game I played recently, and I cannot remember what it's called, and I'm very sorry. But it's essentially where you're two people and you both have completely different play experiences because you are in different points. It's like in a castle and you're trying to escape. I'll figure out what it's called and I'll put it in the description when this goes on YouTube. But I found that so interesting because then the replayability of that as well. So it could kind of also link into the play and pass element that you were talking about as well, Dan. You can be quite creative with your solutions in creating multiplayer options for these games rather than just the traditional sense.
Definitely, and I think obviously there's just so many kind of usages of multiplayer. I mean, Sid, maybe you can talk a bit about My Little Pony on Roblox. I mean, Roblox is more kind of like about interaction and gestures and role play, which again, it's like it's different. Again, there's so many kind of different ways to utilize multiplayer, but again, it goes back to time and it goes back to kind of the features you can put in.
We were
Yeah, I
here
wanted
and
to.
we were here too.
Yeah,
Just throwing that out there. Someone put it in chat. Thank you so much. That is the game.
Nice.
yeah. I wanted to squeeze in a quick point about like co-op doesn't always have to be like the exact same experience duplicated on the screen at the same time. Like for a game jam context, you could have it so one person does a run, then it's like, okay, player two, your turn, and then you just see who can like score higher. Or maybe if you're on a keyboard, you could have like split inputs where two people are trying to like control one character, right? So there's different ways you can approach co-op. You don't have to exactly like mirror the experience perfectly because that is a lot of work. That commentary is correct.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. Another example came to mind was that I've been thinking about is "Keep Talking and No One Explodes." It's a very different experience, and I think that game did it in a very interesting way, where like one person's reading the instructions and the other person is trying to figure out things. So yeah, as you said, Anna, just adding to your point, like there can be like non-linear ways of doing it instead of just kind of replicating things, which could have very interesting results as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see all the creativity that comes out of this, honestly, because there's so much already that I've seen in the Discord. So I think it's great, and this sort of style thing. Oh, yeah, Sky in the chat has just said Brothers style gameplay would be interesting.
Yeah,
If
that's awesome.
with obviously if no one's played it in the chat, it's where you control two players with either stick on a controller or I don't know how you play it on PC. I play it on PC? No, I'm sure I played it on controller. Anyway, it was really interesting, a very different experience for me that can also be like a two-player experience. So I thought that was really neat. But bringing it back on topic, obviously this mental health jam is about mental health, as the title would suggest. And so when we're looking at getting depictions of mental health within games, what kind of factors should we consider when we're doing that, especially when it's in relation to younger audiences? Like how difficult is it to implement more heavier topics or more emotional topics within children's games? I'll pick on someone. Dan.
So,
I mean,
Anna, do you want to go?
I would say definitely don't try to take all of that pressure on your own. Like, I think it's, we don't try to be experts in everything. We'll use consultants to like cover like a wide variety of topics. We have people consult on like user experience. We have people consult on like very specific types of mechanics. So um, definitely do your research and like rely on people who are, you know, experts in that area.
I mean, yeah, I fully agree with that. I think games for me, obviously, I look at the kind of the positives in terms of once an experience has been made. Obviously, the escapism element that a lot of people find from playing games, obviously playing together as well. In terms of kind of how we see it out, right? I see the positives as again going back to co-op. If you're playing with family, it can be a time to kind of reflect and almost see a shared interest. Again, if we talk about, say, at the end of the day, you're playing with, your children, you can kind of say, "Oh, how was your day at school?" And I think it's one of these questions where, you might not always get an answer, but if it's a more relaxed environment and you're having a shared experience playing a game together, I think it's a way to kind of promote that positivity and again the positives of gaming really, bringing people together. But there's games. I think it is a very difficult topic to kind of fully cover within games, but I just think having conversations about mental health and promoting it in a positive way, which I see like a video games just in general as being a force to help people really.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's honestly that's kind of the point I was hoping you were going to make, because one of the biggest things that I try and do with the website, we have a list of mental health related games, and they're so varied because there's so many different elements and representations of what mental health can look like, the feelings it can evoke in players, and the conversations that can happen as a result of gameplay. And so seeing more abstract representations rather than very literal and quite like, intense representations of mental health can be just as powerful. And it's totally up to you in the way that you want to show that and get that across. So I would really recommend just thinking about what you think will be the most impactful, and that would be, if you are looking to design your game for a younger audience, maybe see how you could make it more subtle or more toned down in a way that everyone can understand it, because it's, mental health is rooted in almost everything we do, and familial relationships are a huge part of that as well. So I'm sure there's lots of things to kind of draw within that, and by promoting positive collaborative gameplay within family settings is a huge part of that process, right? So yeah, I think there's lots of scope here, for players to incorporate mental health in however way they would like, especially with, obviously one of the main things being about COVID and how it affected people. I'm sure that there's a lot of interesting stories you could tell with children who weren't able to go to school for a while, for example. So, there's lots of things you can look at. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything before I move on, but I was going to look at playtesting. I know that we've talked a little bit about having consultation with kids and getting their expert opinions on fun and what works, what doesn't. But are there any stories that you could share about, or any like specific examples that you could share that might help people who are taking part in the game jam, and what they could learn from regarding testing. Sid, do you want to start?
I was just going to mention like the amount of times that like we've just been like, this game works perfectly for us, and like everything is looking great and feeling great, and like the amount of things that like playtesting revealed in terms of how kids are perceiving that has been so enlightening, because it's like, hey, these kind of the flow of the game and like the way the game navigates is very clear when we are testing it like between us and we are playing it, but it they're like little things that kids get stuck at, like if there are like boxes that you need to break to go past the level, they might have forgotten that they can break those boxes. So like we got so many learnings out of it, like reminding players again of the mechanics later down the line and things like that. That was so interesting. So I think playtesting has overall taught us a lot about design as well. Just seeing the kids play and seeing where they get stuck, where we might never really think about it. So I think it's been very interesting to kind of learn as we see kind of these kids play.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to say, I think being able to kind of, I guess, build something simple to begin with, and then find enough fun within that is maybe a good foundation point. And obviously, with children, if you consider kind of different abilities, something that obviously if you've got a feature in the game, you maybe, okay, I need text for this, I need a big glowing arrow, and chances are a kid will kind of ignore all that anyway. So maybe personally, I think it's absolutely appropriate to kind of look to build a simple game, and there's nothing wrong with simple. It's just kind of looking at it in terms of what input do I need to make jumping fun, for example. What input do I need to kind of make navigation throughout the world intuitive, and then maybe pass it to a family member that's maybe a test, someone who isn't familiar with games, and if they can access it, or the sort of things that maybe they would struggle with, and it's like try to accommodate it there. Because I think, again, we can look at games that maybe from our past that would appear kind of simple, but they're actually very difficult to kind of master going back now, and they were achieved with maybe two buttons in the directional input. So I think that would be something I would say, it is start simple. But in terms of playtesting, it doesn't necessarily have to be you've got to build together. It can also be playing your own work, and that's something that I think as a designer, it's quite difficult to kind of remember to do. But just the more you play something, the more you'll think, oh, actually, I'll tweak this jump. I'll kind of there's loads of bugs with this I need to kind of address. So I think just play as much as you can, and yeah, just get as much input as you can as well.
Yeah, I really like the simplicity idea because like some of my favorite games that I find the most fun have like one button or one main thing, like Good Job, for example, on Switch. I love that game. It's so much fun. My partner introduced it to me. It's delightful. You don't really, you can just mess around. You don't even have to do the objective. You can still have fun just destroying things. Like there's really no need to actually do anything. And I'm pretty sure it's always got the objective up in the top, so you don't forget what you're supposed to do if you do go off and start, throwing fire extinguishers everywhere and breaking all the walls, because that's delightful and I love it. So I think simplicity is a great option for that as well. And just I think ultimately the main point of this game jam is to be authentic and for it to be fun. And if your gameplay can kind of surround and encapsulate those two factors when you're playing whatever you make, even if it's simpler than you would have hoped for or wanted to at the start of the scope of the project, it's still going to be successful. So that's my take, at least. I wanted to ask specifically about Bluey's development process, because I'm aware that you did playtesting in pairs. Could you elaborate on that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm quite kind of proud of this in terms of like when I was playing it in co-op, and it's something I've kind of done for a while. It was maybe during pandemic as well, and again, I think from my background being in development, it's all been in the studio, it's all been with kind of maybe other designers, coders, and it was actually kind of my daughter was like, is that the Bluey game? And it's like, well, yeah, do you want to kind of have a look and have a play? Um, so it was actually um, again kind of a more of an improv playtest session. Really, it was seeing what was there, having that curiosity, but also that kind of honesty that I think children have, where it's like, why doesn't it do this? Or, and it there was kind of a feature about the trampoline, and at the time it wasn't kind of interactable, and it also was like, I want to be able to bounce on the trampoline. And I think, again, as creators, as designers, if you're considering the kind of, does the game say yes to these kind of instances, would a player kind of want to kind of explore that way? And I think moments like that can come up all the time, really. And having the benefit of playing together or viewing playtests, you kind of see the way children kind of approach things, where they craft a story about how the game rules will function. I find it so fascinating and amazing and incredible, because I think as a designer, when I've maybe designed kids games or designed kids games, I try and put myself back to when I was playing games, but again, it can change all the time. And um, it's just looking at that philosophy and looking at some children where they'll set a challenge for themselves to get to a certain place, and how can you reflect that within the game? And equally, some children don't want an objective; they just want to get straight into the action. So, like, I think with Paw Patrol World, we maybe went. It's something we've done in the past where there's a lot of tutorialization where we're trying to cover every single base possible. Where in actuality, a child will want to kind of play as Rubble. They want to play as Chase or Marshall. Well, why don't we let them do that straight away? So it's a very different approach to kind of making games, but I think the key factor is to just embrace that player voice and embrace what the fans kind of want out of a game experience. And it maybe is different to kind of games that we'd play, where chases 100 XP to unlock, or you have to progress to level 5 to get them. Whereas how could you justify to a child you can't play as Chase yet? Why not? So yeah, it's fascinating. It's amazing what you can find if you listen.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, like, I was thinking about this, and obviously, specifically about the Lego games, because obviously they are like very family friendly and children can have fun. But that was one of the games I love them as an adult. I think they're great, and I used that game to play with a kid I used to babysit ages ago, and that's the game we'd sit and play, and it was silly and there was no real consequences to it, and it was great, and we both had a good time. And I think that's ultimately kind of one of the points I guess that I'm trying to make for this, is that even if you are aiming it at children, it can still be fun for everyone. It's a bit like Shrek. In
Yeah.
that it's a great film for kids, but there's references that they're not going to get that make adults laugh. Like, I love that. I think it's great. Big Shrek fan. But I just think it's really interesting how you can kind of tailor your design of a game to meet lots of specific different needs. This guy's calling me out about bringing up Shrek, but I'm not going to apologize for it. Anna, did you have anything to add, just to bring you back into the conversation?
No, I think you're completely right. Like, we are big kids. We have that inner child. Like, if I'm playing a Lego game, I am just going to smash everything and not follow the objective. Like, you can absolutely have fun as an adult playing Bluey or Paw Patrol, right? It's just, we try to make sure it's joyful for everyone.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the important thing. Um, So, final question. I guess what sort of advice would you like to give people who are starting in this game jam, or maybe have just begun their journey in this game jam, specifically around designing games for younger audiences? Is there any advice, tips, stories you'd like to share that might help them on their journey? We'll start with you, Anna, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a lot of takeaways we can do. I think if I guess know your audience. If you're thinking about targeting a younger audience, you should probably decide that quite soon, because that'll impact like maybe how detailed you want to be with like the tutorials and stuff. I mean, I always recommend being quite detailed in general, but um, if you want to target a younger audience, that might impact like what controls you might do. You might only want to do like one or two buttons. Um, so yeah, definitely know your audience, and understand like the limitations or challenges that audience might have when it comes to playing your game.
Brilliant, thank you. Sid, I'm going to move to you.
Yeah, I think something that I would give kind of advice on is like don't be too married to your idea in a way. I think especially because if you're gonna playtest your games, things might need tweaking, iterating, and like some ideas, you know, some features might be getting in the way of, when you test it with players, they might be finding it that these ideas might be getting in the way of things. I think be ready for change in a way, and like be ready to tweak your ideas in a mindful way, and just be conscious of the like it is an experience that you are kind of creating for other players, but also like look into how other players are reacting to it and like kind of what they are wanting or what they are thinking is missing. It's I used to, when I was working on my own project at university, I got into like, because I was so into the development, I often had tunnel vision on my idea where I almost forgot kind of all of the, I almost forgot like almost where I was going with certain things. So like I didn't know how this feature was kind of interacting with other things because I was so into just working on this one feature, and seeing it with other people, like playing other people playing it, kind of gives you more clarity. So be aware, kind of be ready to make changes, basically, is what I'm trying to get to.
Awesome. And Dan, last but not least.
Yeah, I'll just elaborate on that. I think it's so kind of important. Obviously, at the start of the conversation, if you have an idea that's maybe too big, think about ways to kind of either a part of that or think of a feature of a game that you've really enjoyed. How would you develop that into a full experience? Would people enjoy it? Ask these questions. But I think trying to get out your comfort zone is important. In terms of if you're really good at kind of like level design, try a bit of maybe game design as well, try a bit of scripting, and it's something that I've been lucky and that I didn't feel lucky at the time, but being out your comfort zone and doing new skills, you not only get an understanding about how things are put together, but it'll also help you in the long term as well. But don't be critical of yourself. We're all human. Just I think it's just anything will benefit you as a creator and as a designer, and just don't necessarily see things as all or nothing either, because I think I would add there's multiple games that I've kind of worked on that have never been released, features the same as well, and they still live on in different ways, and same with games, elements that you really like and live on somewhere else, as kind of inspirations. So yeah, it's just get an editor you're familiar with, and then yeah, just try something new, I would say.
Absolutely. I think this is a great opportunity to just try things. There's a long time for a reason. You can explore and try and learn new skills. As a part of that, we're hoping to put this on a more regular basis. Hopefully every year, we'll see. So there will always be more opportunities and more jams to continue to develop those skills and learn and see what works and what doesn't. I thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and for imparting your knowledge on us and the community. we are going to take questions for the last few minutes. One I can see already is, I started typing this before the topic switched to testing, but now it's about advice. So when approaching idea for this game jam, mental health as a main theme, I really like how Toby Fox said it. I'm not going to say games can save the world or anything like that, but you can save someone's day. And it's so true. It's magical how a new Deltarune chapter can make almost anything disappear for at least 1 or 2 hours. This is the kind of feeling that keeps me going as a dev sometimes. I love that. I also love Undertale. It's one of my favourites. So I really, really resonate with that as well. And it's true. Like, games are ultimately vehicles for fun, right? But they can be so much more than that, depending on how people connect with them. So I think as long as you make something that you think will connect with even just one person, that could really, change someone's day. I agree. I don't know if anyone else wanted to add anything to that. But
I'll just say I agree. Like, we're really lucky to be able to make games that mean a lot to people, that use like really famous IP as well. I think, game development, like, it can be stressful, but also it isn't like, it's not like heart surgery. So we're lucky that like in some ways it isn't like life changing, but it also can be life changing. So, it's really nice to make an impact.
absolutely. I mean, some of the games that I've had in my childhood have shaped me as, like, in my career today, for example. Like, I get to talk about them all the time as a job, and it's great. But also, like, they remind me of key memories that I had during that time and help me connect with my brother, for example, who we were quite arguey as brother and sister, and games was the only thing that we could really sit down and just not yell at each other about, generally because I wasn't playing, but also it was fun for both of us and it was something else to take your mind off it. So it's I just think it's really cool to see everyone creating these experiences from their own life as well.
Yeah, totally. I think that's something that I had a similar experience with, like, when brother growing up, like coming back from school. Even if you had a stressful day, it was like always something to look forward to, is going back home, turning the computer on and playing Tekken with my brother. And I think it's just like those key moments. I'm like really glad to work in an industry where we get the opportunity to build them for maybe some other people as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I went back to RuneScape in the pandemic. I played it religiously as a kid, and with my best friend. And so during the pandemic, we were both stuck in opposite ends of London. We couldn't see each other. It was very lonely, and so we got a bottle of wine each and we played RuneScape. And it was so much fun, and it was so much nostalgia, and I just think it's incredible the power that a game can have, even if it's, you go back to it and it's not quite the same as what you expected, or it's slightly different, whatever it might be. It can still have such a profound impact on players, which I think is wonderful, and why we're doing this jam in the first place, really, is to share those experiences with each other, and with yourself as well. Like, part of this experience in itself is a self-development process, I suppose, and self-reflective as well. So especially if you're making something about your own experiences, which I know that a few game dev champions are. So it's really cool. You're doing great. That's ultimately my take home for that. I can't see any other questions in the chat, so what I will do is leave it there for now. But I believe a couple of these lovely folks are in our Discord, so if you do have any specific questions, you might be able to fire them over, or I can field them and see if I can get answers for you. We will also be putting this live on, not live, it is live now. We'll be putting this after this on YouTube, so that you can scroll back and figure out if there's other things that you'd like to add or re-listen to. But thank you so much for listening to these wonderful people. Thank you, Anna, Dan, and Sid, for being here and sharing your knowledge with everyone. It's been really, really helpful, and I'm really grateful for your time. I think that's probably it. So
Thanks for having us.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
of course. No, lovely to have you. So yeah, everyone else, we'll see you for the next masterclass soon. It will be next month. I will keep you all posted about that in the Discord and on Itch. Other than that, have a wonderful day, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye,
Have a
everyone.
wonderful day,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Look after jams.